far as I'm concerned, if you can make it through your day and still sleep at night, you're doing better than most.
This quote from Miggs Mayfeld, aka Bill Burr, from The Mandalorian Chapter 15 is a quote that really stood out to me. In a way, this quote resembles the human experience. We all make choices throughout our lives. We all make mistakes. But at the end of the day, if you can fall asleep peacefully at night, you're doing better than most. When the Obi-Wan series was around the corner, I thought a bit about this quote. Obi-Wan has been through hell and back. He lost almost everyone he loved. He lost his entire livelihood and was forced to go into hiding on a desert planet where he would live out his days working menial jobs. No love from anyone, not even being able to have a relationship with the child he's protecting, just sitting alone every night. When we saw the dreams he was having almost 10 years after Revenge of the Sith, and we saw him wake up stressed, filled with guilt and regret, I knew I would love this series. Because Obi-Wan is a man who doesn't sleep well at night. Even though he may sleep, he doesn't get rest. The most that Miggs Mayfeld was referring to are people like Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan Kenobi is dealing with trauma, and seeing him wake up in the middle of the night stressed was the start of the Masterclass that is the series' approach to trauma. For the purposes of this video, I will only be discussing the first 2 episodes, but mostly the first one. Prior to the first episode premiering, literally minutes beforehand, I mentioned how I thought it would be neat if for the previously on for the first episode, they just recapped the prequels.
I wonder if they're gonna do a previously on, like for the first episode, and then just show Revenge of the Sith. Oh!
And that ended up happening, but way better than I could have imagined. The recap put a focus on the relationship between Anakin and Obi-Wan. I stand by the belief that the Anakin and Obi-Wan relationship should have been the core of the prequels, and seeing Lucasfilm highlight that here was brilliant. Obi-Wan's trauma doesn't simply stem from the events of Revenge of the Sith. Sure, Order 66 and the death of the other Jedi hurt him deeply, but it was Anakin's fall to the dark side that currently keeps him up at night. At the end of the Phantom Menace, Qui-Gon entrusted Obi-Wan in training Anakin, and Obi-Wan not only failed at that, but his failure resulted in the eradication of the Jedi Order. When we see his dreams, it is all about Anakin, moments these two shared when they were brothers. Obi-Wan really loved this man, and that haunts him 10 years after the fact. When looking up common symptoms of people with serious PTSD, I found the following symptoms: being easily startled or frightened, always being on guard for danger, self-destructive behavior like drugs or alcohol, trouble sleeping, angry outbursts, and overwhelming guilt or shame. Let's take a look at these first 2 episodes and see if any of this applies to Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan's story begins with him going through his ordinary life. We see him at his job where he just cuts up meat. He's a butcher. When he checks out for the day, he sees a fellow employee being abused. What does Obi-Wan do? This former guardian of peace and justice just stands there and does nothing. This is not the same Obi-Wan from the prequels. This is a man who is broken. After going through all the trauma he's been through, can anyone blame him for not having any hope? A few minutes later, we visibly see how he straight up lets Jawas take advantage of him. These 2 instances of not standing up for himself or others are a great way to show Obi-Wan's mental state to begin this series. Writing 101 is all about show don't tell. You want to see your characters express how they feel without blatantly saying it. Obi-Wan never simply says he's depressed or that he's broken, but by the way he acts, you can tell all of this. Not standing up for yourself or for others is associated with fear or lack of self-respect. Now, some may simply say this is character assassination. Obi-Wan would never not stand up for someone. After debating the topic of Luke in The Last Jedi, I think I'm somewhat of an expert on the topic of old men dealing with trauma in Star Wars. Obi-Wan is still a kind and good-hearted man. On 3 separate occasions in the first episode, the camera focuses on Obi-Wan saving a piece of meat for his space camel. This shows that behind this broken man, he still has a good heart. He's still Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he still watches over Luke and attempts to bring him a gift. He may be broken, but he hasn't forgotten the only purpose he has left, and that's protecting Luke. One night when he is traveling home, a surviving Jedi approaches him. A Jedi named Nari asks for Obi-Wan's help and tells him how much he's been through. While the episode completely glosses over how Nari managed to find Obi-Wan, thematically thematically, this is still a very important moment for Obi-Wan. In the typical hero's journey fashion, Obi-Wan refuses the call. His advice to the young Jedi is to take his lightsaber and bury it in the middle of the desert, symbolically burying the identity of a Jedi with it, something we see he did himself later on in the episode. Nari responds by saying, "You were once a great Jedi. What happened to you?" When a man is broken like Obi-Wan, sometimes they become unrecognizable, and that is how Nari sees Obi-Wan. He is unrecognizable. A good portion of the episode focuses on Leia and what her story is going to be about, but as any great story should do, the development of all characters should serve the development of the protagonist. Leia getting captured isn't simply just a plot point to get Obi-Wan off Tatooine. Its main purpose is to instill hope into Obi-Wan again. When Bail and Bria Organa call Obi-Wan to ask for his help, Obi-Wan enters deflection mode. He brings up excuse after excuse for why he shouldn't be the one to go rescue Leia. None of these excuses are necessarily bad reasons, but they're masking the truth that Obi-Wan is hiding. We all do this. When we don't want to do something, we think of reasons not to do it that make us feel less ashamed of ourselves. Obi-Wan is asked to leave Tatooine. He can't do that because he needs to protect Luke. But just like Obi-Wan, we all know that we are masking our real reason. When Bail confronts Obi-Wan in person, he exposes him and his real reason why he won't go help Leia. He failed to save Anakin. What makes him think that he can go save Leia too? Bail eventually convinces him and Obi-Wan decides he will go help Leia. He goes to the desert and retrieves his lightsaber, something that surely isn't easy for him. The first episode ends with him leaving Tatooine. What this episode did brilliantly was establish the mental state that Obi-Wan is in and set up the struggles he will go through for the rest of the season. The second episode is all about Obi-Wan being thrusted back into the real world. Right as he lands, he runs into a clone, one of the 501st no less, Anakin's unit. Obi-Wan gets spooked by this, and rightfully so, but instead of focusing on Obi-Wan's response to this moment highlights the depressing reality of the clones. They were used to eradicate the Jedi, and then they were simply tossed aside afterwards. This opening to chapter 2 sets up some really depressing ideas. First, the clone became homeless after the war, and then the second was his encounter with this girl. When Obi-Wan tells her that he lost his daughter, the girl responds by saying he will never see his daughter again. She would know because she was once someone's daughter. She adds on by saying that if he were to take some of this spice, he would forget about her entirely. This is one of the more darker moments of Star Wars. The implication here is that either this girl had a family and was able to forget about them entirely because of the spice, or her parents got on drugs and forgot about her. These moments here are present to test Obi-Wan. Is he going to give in to the depressing reality of the world or continue to fight? When he finds Leia, she stands out in this cruel world. While she may be naive about certain things, she's a beacon of love and optimism. In probably one of the more touching parts of the episode, Obi-Wan hints that Leia reminds him of Padme. Padme was a leader, someone who cared for others. Obi-Wan sees that in Leia. Some theorize that he may have been talking about Satine, but I don't buy that. For one, Leia is Padme's daughter. I mean, how often do people tell kids they remind them of their parents? That makes it seem like it's Padme. And secondly, the casual audience doesn't know who Satine is, so making that connection would be weird. In the series, Obi-Wan hasn't gone through his character arc yet. We're only a third of the way through the series. But going forward, it is clear that Leia is going to instill hope back into Obi-Wan. How she will do that has yet to be seen, but this adventure is going to change Obi-Wan for the better. I want to go back to the symptoms of PTSD that I spoke about earlier and see what applies to Obi-Wan here. The first is easily startled or frightened. We see this when he runs into a clone again and when the Inquisitors show up on Tatooine, so I would say this applies to Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan is certainly always on guard for danger. He has a droid outside his cave that will alert him if someone is in his home, so this applies as well. Destructive behavior like drugs or alcohol. This is Star Wars, so we will never see our main character be a drug addict or an alcoholic, but Obi-Wan was given some drugs which he properly disposed of, so this doesn't apply here. He absolutely has trouble sleeping, as we saw in the beginning of chapter 1. Obi-Wan at this point hasn't had any angry outbursts, but I wouldn't be surprised if at some point later in the series he will have one. The last is overwhelming guilt or shame. This is what the whole series is about, so that's definitely true. So besides the drugs and alcohol one, all these do apply to Obi-Wan, with the angry outbursts one likely to happen in a later chapter, and that is most likely going to happen when Obi-Wan will have to confront the ghost that still haunts him, and that is Anakin. When Obi-Wan learns that Anakin is still alive and is a thriving Sith Lord, this overwhelms him. In some ways, Anakin surviving as a Sith Lord is far worse than him dying in Revenge of the Sith. Obi-Wan now realizes realizes he has to overcome his biggest fear. He has to overcome the root of his trauma, and that is facing Anakin again. I imagine there will be a moment later where Obi-Wan and Vader have a conversation, and in that conversation, Obi-Wan will get everything off his chest. He will express all of his emotions. Maybe like Kylo Ren in The Rise of Skywalker, Obi-Wan will be able to forgive himself for what happened in Revenge of the Sith. He will defeat Vader and return home to Tatooine, where he will have a conversation with Qui-Gon, because that was definitely set up in Chapter 1, but when Obi-Wan returns home, he will be a changed man. He won't be the same depressed man we saw in Chapter 1. He will be a man of hope, someone who has a newfound purpose, someone who has overcome his trauma, and as Mix Mayfeld explained it, someone who will be able to sleep at night. Thank you everyone so much for watching another one of my videos. Don't forget to thank the Cloud Squad, and I will see you guys next time.